Hello everyone, and welcome back to Let's Play Skyrim. Last time we did the Glenmoral Coven and made our way north to the Driftshade Refuge. We're kind of breaking the exploration sequence to just go ahead and finish off the companion's quest line, but that's okay. Anyway, we are here at Driftshade Refuge. Our objective is pretty simple. Purity of Revenge. Retrieve the fragments of Wuthrad and wipe out the Silver Hand. Optional, but we'll do it. Vilkas has come with me to avenge the death of Kodlak by wiping out the Silver Hand. Let's do it. Go into the fort if he's not with us now. Anyway, there are two Silver Hand out here. There's the one melee guy who mans the front door, who we've already killed, as you can see. A ton of snowberries out here. And there's an archer up on the roof who we'll get to when I'm good and ready. More snowberries as we run around to the back. There she is. Well, this is the last time I've done these guys. Death rate 7 destruction. And they're both dead. Good, good, good. Let's heal up and move right along. Here. Still on the outside. Let's clear the exterior and then we'll check the inside. Oh, Vilkas caught up. Awesome. Inside the tower, there is also nothing. Only 26 destruction ranks to go.
Huh? We're going to make them pay. We're going to make them pay.
I think that's what he'll say. That's just fine. Nothing in this room. Let's head down the stairs. Just keep my spell out and ready. See two Silver Hands here. Suddenly not hurting. That's it. There are only two inside this room. Let's heal up and we'll keep going. One thing I want to do before I'm going to finish clearing out this room. And that door's straight ahead, and a pattern we've seen before is barred. Our only option is this door over here. But first, I want to run back outside very briefly. Don't worry, there's a method to madness. We're going to fast travel to the refuge so that my horse is outside. That way, even if I get over encumbered, I can Everything's in order. That's break left.
What was that?
And he's dead. Now we're free to loot these rooms. Let's start over here. We have Red Galarian the Mystic. Oh my goodness. A powdered mammoth tusk. One of the ingredients we're still missing an effect of. Specifically, that fourth effect is fear. So I will hold on to that. And we'll clear that one off the list. Ancestors of the Dunmer we've read. Let's move on into this room. Kinds of stuff in here. Already up to 384. I'm gonna let myself get over encumbered. This place is big. It would require many, many, many offloads. And while I would normally be worried about dying, my boy Vilcus has me covered. I want that tankard down there. Go in and get it. What do we have over here? More burned and ruined books. And just like that, we're already over encumbered. Lusty Argonian Maid V1, I believe we've read already. Let me make certain of that. Oh yes. We've read both volumes, actually.
We're going to make them pay.
Yes, we are, Lucas. Yes, we are. Should be two more silver hands in here. Saw one walking over here to the left.
Give up when you still can.
He can pretty much take care of business all by himself.
Here. Your face. Just
let me have that one. Trained his block. Alright. We're now free to loot this room. Fair boots. Boatload of burned and ruined books. Oh look. Copy of Uncommon Taste. Song of Pelennor V2. We have read that entire series. Argonian Account Book 4. Now that one's new. It's the final entry in that series. Very good. The Argonian Account Book 4 by Walkin Jarth. Decimus Scotty was drowning, and he didn't think much of it. He couldn't move his arms or his legs to swim because of the paralysis spell the Argonian peasant had lobbed at him, but he wasn't quite sinking. The Oncobra River was a crashing force of white water and currents that could carry along large rocks with ease, so Scotty tumbled head over heels, spinning, bumping, bouncing along. He figured that soon enough he would be dead, and that would be better than being in Black Marsh. He wasn't too panicked about it all when he felt his lungs fill with water and cold blackness fell upon him. For a while, for the first time in some time, Decimus Scotty felt peace, blessed darkness. And then pain came to him, and he felt himself coughing, spewing water up from his belly and his lungs. A voice said, "Oh bother, he's alive, ain't he now?" Scotty wasn't quite sure if that were true, even when he opened his eyes and looked at the face above him. It was an Argonian, but unlike any he had seen anywhere. The face was thin and long, like a thick lance. The scales were ruby red, brilliant in the sunlight. It blinked at him, its eyelids opening and closing in vertical slits. "I don't suppose we should eat you, should we now?" the creature smiled, and Scotty could tell from its teeth that it was no idle suggestion. "Thank you," said Scotty weakly. He craned his head slightly to find out who the we were, and discovered he was on the muddy bank of the still, sludgy river, surrounded by a group of Argonians with similarly needle-like faces and a whole rainbow of scales, bright greens and gem-like purples, blues, and oranges. "Can you tell me, am I near, well, anywhere?" The ruby-colored Argonian laughed. "No, you're in the middle of everywhere, and near nowhere." "Oh," said Scotty, who grasped the idea that space did not mean much in Black Marsh. "And who are you, and what are you?" "We are Agacephs," the ruby-colored Argonian replied. "My name is Nomu." Scotty introduced himself. "I'm a senior clerk in Lord Vanek's building commission in the Imperial City. My job was to come here to try to fix the problems of commerce, but I've lost my agenda, haven't met with any of my contacts, the archines of Gideon, pompous assimilated slaver kleptocrats," a small lemon-colored Agaseph murmured with some feeling, "and now I just want to go home." Nomu smiled, his long mouth arching up like a host happy to see an unwanted guest leave a party. "Shez will guide you." Shez, it seemed, was the bitter little yellow creature, and he was not at all pleased at the assignment. With surprising strength, he hoisted Scotty up, and for a moment the clerk was reminded of Gemullis dropping him into the bubbling muck that led to the Underground Express. Instead, Shez shoved Scotty toward a tiny little raft, razor thin, that bobbed on the surface of the water. "This is how you travel?" "We don't have the broken wagons and dying horses of our brothers on the outside," Shez replied, rolling his tiny eyes. "We don't know better." The Argonian sat at the back of the craft and used his whip-like tail to propel and navigate the craft. They traveled quickly around swirling pools of slime that stank of centuries of putrefaction, past pinnacled mountains that seemed sturdy but suddenly fell apart at the slightest ripple in the still water, under bridges that might have once been metal but were now purely rust. "Everything in Tamriel flows down to Black Marsh," Shez said. As they slid through the water, Shez explained to Scotty that the Agacephs were one of the many Argonian tribes that lived in the interior of the province, near the Hist, finding little in the outside world worth seeing. He was fortunate to have been found by them. The Nagas, the toad-like Patru, and the winged Sarpa would have killed him on the spot. There were other creatures, too, to be avoided. Though there were few natural predators in inner Black Marsh, the scavengers that rooted in the garbage seldom shied away from a living meal. Hackwings circled overhead, like the ones Scotty had seen in the west. Shez fell silent and stopped the raft completely, waiting for something. Scotty looked in the direction Shez was watching, and saw nothing unusual in the filthy water. Then he realized the pool of green slime in front of them was actually moving, and fairly quickly, from one bank to the other. It deposited small bones behind it as it oozed up into the reeds, and disappeared. "Voroplasm," Shez explained, moving the boat forward again. "Big word. It'll strip you to the bone by the second syllable." Scotty, desirous to distract himself from the sights and smells that surrounded him, thought it a good time to compliment his pilot on his excellent vocabulary. It was particularly impressive given how far from civilization they were. The Argonians in the east did, in fact, speak so well. "They tried to erect a temple of Mara near here in Umfolo 20 years ago," Shez explained, and Scotty nodded, remembering reading about it in the files before they were lost. "They all perished quite dreadfully of swamp rot in the first month, but they left behind some excellent books." Scotty was going to inquire further when he saw something so huge, so horrifying, it made him stop, frozen. Half submerged in the water ahead was a mountain of spines lying on 9-foot-long claws. White eyes stared blindly forward, and then suddenly the whole creature spasmed and lurched, the jaw of its mouth jutting out, exposing tusks clotted with gore. Swamp Leviathan, Shays whistled, impressed. Very, very dangerous. Scotty gasped, wondering why the Agasef was so calm, and more, why he was continuing to steer the raft forward towards the beast. Of all the creatures in the world, the rats are sometimes the worst, said Shays, and Scotty noticed that the huge creature was only a husk. Its movement was from the hundreds of rats that had burrowed into it, rapidly eating their way from the inside out, bursting from the skin in spots. They are indeed, Scotty said, and his mind went to the Black Marsh files, buried deep in the mud, and 4 decades of Imperial work in Black Marsh. The two continued westward through the heart of Black Marsh. Shays showed Scotty the vast, complicated ruins of the Kothringi capitals, fields of ferns and flowered grasses, quiet streams under canopies of blue moss, and the most astonishing sight of Scotty's life, the great forest of full-grown hist trees. They never saw a living soul until they arrived at the edge of the Imperial Commerce Road just east of Slough Point, where Malik, Scotty's Redguard guide, was waiting patiently. I was going to give you 2 more minutes, the Redguard scowled, dropping the last of his food onto the pile at his feet. No more, sir. The sun was shining bright when Decimus Scotty rode into the Imperial City, and as it caught the morning dew, it lent a glisten to every building as if they had been newly polished for his arrival. It astonished him how clean the city was, and how few beggars there were. The protracted edifice of Lord Vanek's building commission was the same as it had always been, but still the very sight of it seemed exotic and strange. It was not covered in mud. The people within actually, generally, worked. Lord Vanek himself, though singularly squat and squinty, seemed immaculate, not only relatively clean of dirt and scabs, but also relatively uncorrupt. Scotty couldn't help but stare at him when he first caught sight of his boss. Vanek stared right back. You are a sight, the little fellow frowned. Did your horse drag you to Black Marsh and back? I would say go home and fix yourself, but there are a dozen people here to see you. I hope you have solutions for them. It was no exaggeration. Nearly 20 of Cyrodiil's most powerful and wealthiest people were waiting for him. Scotty was given an office even larger than Lord Vanek's, and he met with each. First among the Commission's clients were 5 independent traders, blustering and loaded with gold, demanding to know what Scotty intended to do about improving the trade routes. Scotty summarized for them the conditions of the main roads, the state of the merchants' caravans, the sunken bridges, and all the other impediments between the frontier and the marketplace. They told him to have everything replaced and repaired, and gave him the gold necessary to do it. Within 3 months, the bridge at Slough Point had disappeared into the muck, the great caravan had collapsed into decrepitude, and the main road from Gideon had been utterly swallowed up by swamp water. The Argonians began once again to use the old ways, their personal rafts and sometimes the underground express to transport the grain in small quantities. It took a third of the time, 2 weeks, to arrive in Cyrodiil, none of it rotten. The Archbishop of Mara was the next client Scotty met with, a kind-hearted man, horrified by the tales of Argonian mothers selling their children into slavery. He pointedly asked Scotty if it were true. Sadly, yes, Scotty replied, and the Archbishop showered him with septims, telling the clerk that food must be brought to the province to ease their suffering, and the schools must be improved so they could learn to help themselves. Within 5 months, the last book had been stolen from the deserted Maran monastery in Umfolo. As the Archines went bankrupt, their slaves returned to his parents' tiny farms. The backwater Argonians found that they could grow enough to feed their families, provided they had enough hard workers in their enclave, and the buyer's market for slaves sharply declined. Ambassador Cisliegth, concerned about the rising crime in northern Black Marsh, brought with him the contributions of many other expatriate Argonians like himself. They wanted more Imperial guards on the border of Slough Point, more magically lit lanterns posted along the main roads at regular intervals, more patrol stations, and more schools built to allow young Argonians to better themselves and not turn to crime. Within 6 months, there were no more Nagas roaming the roads, as there were no merchants traveling them to rob. The thugs returned to the fetid inner swamp, where they felt much happier, their constitutions enriched by the rot and pestilence that they loved. Sliek and his constituency were so pleased by the crime rate dropping, they brought even more gold to Decimus Scotti, telling him to keep up the good work. Black Marsh simply was, is, and always shall be unable to sustain a large-scale cash crop plantation economy. The Argonians, and anyone else, the whole of Tamriel, could live in Black Marsh on subsistence farming, just raising what they needed. That was not sad, Scotti thought. That was hopeful. Scotti's solution to each of their dilemmas had been the same. 10% of the gold they gave him went to Lord Vannick's building commission. The rest Scotti kept for himself, and did exactly nothing about the requests. Within a year, Decimus Scotti had embezzled enough to retire very comfortably, and Black Marsh was better off than it had been in 40 years. Now, there you go. Almost missed these. Wouldn't want that, now would we? I think we're going to have at least one other new book in here. We've read An Explorer's Guide to Skyrim. We've read The Whisperer. Let's get all this junk first. Alright, Charwick Koninge V2. I think this is the first book we've found out of this series. It is. The Charwick Koninge Letters, Book 2. 3 Last Seed, 3rd Era 411, Telarune, Morrowind. My good friend Charwick, I only just last week received your letter dated 6 Suns Hide, addressed to me in Sadrith Mora. I did not know how to reach you before to tell you of my progress finding Hadwath Nathweir, so I send this to you now, care of the lady you mentioned in your letter, the Lady Elisbetta Moorling of Wayrest. I hope that if you have left her palace, she will know where you've gone, and can send this to you, and I hope further that you receive it in a timelier manner than I received your letter. It is essential that I hear from you soon, so we may coordinate our next course of action. My adventures here have 2 acts, one before I received your letter, and one immediately after. While you searched for the elusive possessor of Azura's star in his homeland to the west, I searched for him here, where we understood he conjured up the Daedra Prince and received from her the artifact. Like you, I had little difficulty finding people who had heard of or even knew Nathweir. In fact, not long after we parted company and you left for the Iliac Bay, I met someone who knew where he went to perform the ceremony, so I left at once to come here to Telarune. It took some time to locate my contact, for he is a dissident priest named Minarath. The temple and tribunal, the real powers of Morrowind, tend to frown on his order, and while they haven't begun so much of a crusade to stamp them out, there are certainly rumors that they will soon. This tends to make priests like Minarath skittish and paranoid, difficult people to set appointments with. Finally, I was told that he would be willing to talk to me at the Plod and Plaster, a tiny tavern without even a room to rent. Downstairs there were several cloaked men crammed around the tavern's only table, and they searched me to see if I had any weaponry. Of course I hadn't. You know that isn't my preferred method of doing business. When it decided that I was harmless, one of the cloaked figures revealed himself to be Minarath. I paid him the gold I promised, and asked him what he knew about Hadwath Nathweir. He remembered him well enough, saying that after he received the star, the lad intended to return to High Rock. It seemed he had unfinished business there, presumably of a violent nature, which Azura's star would facilitate. He had no other information, and I did not know what else to ask. We parted company, and I waited for your letter, hoping you had found Nathweir, and perhaps even the star. I confess that as I lingered in Morrowind and never heard from you, I began to have doubts about your character. You'll forgive me for saying so, but I began to fear that you had taken the artifact for yourself. In fact, I was making plans to come to High Rock myself when your letter came at last. The tale of your adventure in the cemetery at Grimtree Garden, and the information you gathered from the lycanthropic caretaker, inspired me to have another meeting with Minarath. Thus began the second act of my story. I returned to the Pod and Plaster, reasoning that the priest must frequent that area of the city to feel so comfortable setting clandestine meetings there. It took some time searching, but I finally found him, and as luck would have it, he was alone. I called his name, and he quickly drew me to a dark alleyway, nervous that we would be seen by a temple ordinator. It is a rare and beautiful thing when a victim insists on dragging his killer to a remote location. I began at once asking about this fellow you mentioned, Nathweir's mysterious patron, Beliasir. He denied ever having heard the name. We were still in that easy, fairly conversational state when I attacked the priest. Of course, he was completely taken by surprise. In some ways, that can be more effective than an ambush from behind. No matter how many times I've done it, no one ever expected the friendly man they're talking to grip them by the neck. I pressed hard against my favorite spot in the soft part of the throat, just below the thyroid cartilage, and it took him too long to react to my lunge and try pushing back. He began to lose consciousness, and I whispered that if I released my grip a little so he could talk and breathe, but he tried to call for help, I would snap his neck. He nodded, and I relaxed the pressure just a bit. I asked him again about Beliasir, and he shook his head, insisting that he had never heard the name. As frightened as he was, it seemed most likely that he was telling the truth, so I asked him more generally if he knew anyone else who might know something about Hadwaf Nathweir. He told me that there was a woman present also during the ceremony, someone he introduced as his sister. I remembered then the part of your letter about seeing the grave of Nathweir's sister, Perira. When I mentioned the name to the priest, he nodded frantically, but I could see that the interrogation had reached an ending. There is, after all, something about being throttled that causes a man to answer yes to every question. I snapped Minerath's neck and returned home. So now I'm again unsure how to proceed. I've made several more inquiries, and several of the same people who met Nathweir remember him being the woman. A few recall him saying that she was his sister. One or two believe they remember her name as being Perira, though they're not certain. No one, however, has heard of anyone named Beliasir. If I do not hear word from you in response to this in the next couple of weeks, I will come to High Rock, because it's there that most people believe Nathweir returned. I will only stay here long enough to see if there are other inquiries I can make only in Morrowind to bring us closer to our goal of recovering Azura's star. Your friend, Koninge. Alrighty. I think there are actually going to be a few new skill books in here, too. Lots of books in here, considering the Silverhand are little more than base curve bandits with a penchant for werewolf killing. Let me see about that corner back there. Don't think there's anything except that cast iron pot. Let's move this one. Forge, hammer, and anvil. I think that one's actually good as well. It is. Awesome. Forge, Hammer, and Anvil by Adolphus Iritius. These notes were found in ruins near Old Roldan. As best I can tell, they were written by Thorvald, a rather infamous smith who died shortly before Tiber Septim's reign. He was rumored to be illiterate, and given that these notes are obviously written by an assistant, that rumor is likely true. I have made no attempt to correct the texts themselves, as they may have historical value. Without further ado, the ramblings of Thorvald. This ain't no book for how to be a great smith, so if you're reading this, stop. It's just me own notes, 'cause I'm getting old and cranky and don't remember stuff. These be me own methods for making things. Iron armor and weapons. Lots of iron ingots and some leather strips. Steel armor and weapons. Lots of steel ingots, a little iron, and some leather strips. Except for steel plate. It needs some corundum, too. Leather armor and weapons. Who'd be stupid enough to make leather weapons? Leather armor needs leather. Big pieces and little pieces, just like hide armor. And studded armor. Scaled armor, too. Well, that needs some steel also, and corundum. Can't make scaled armor without corundum. That would be dumb. Dwarfen armor and weapons. Dwarfen scrap metal, some iron, and some leather strips. I'm gonna stop saying leather, 'cause it's always used. Are you writing what I just said? You idiot! Just do it, don't write it. Thorvald is old and fat. Elven armor and weapons. Elves and dwarfs didn't get along. Bet you didn't know that. Elven stuff needs moonstone and a little bit of iron, except for that gilded stuff. Gotta add quicksilver if you want to make gilded elven armor. Orcish armor and weapons. Use orichalcum and a bit of iron. Thorvald doesn't like orcs. Ebony armor and weapons. Takes only ebony. No iron, not even a little. You'll want to, but don't. Glass armor and weapon. Need malachite and some moonstone. Nasty stuff working with malachite. Daedric armor and weapons. Ha! Like I'd write that down. He uses Daedra hearts. I don't know where he gets them. That's all. You can stop writing now. I said stop. Postscript. The last page had a large streak of ink and a few splatters of blood. It would be a fair conclusion that Thorvald beat his assistant. We have no way of knowing if Thorvald ever discovered the extraneous comments added to his script. Adolphus Eretius. There we go. That should be obvious. That's the way forward. Make sure I've got everything, and we'll go check this adjacent room first. Here's an adept-locked chest. With one spare pick. Excellent. Nothing else in here, so let's keep going. Even though it seems like it might have been one, Forge Hammer and Anvil is not a smithing skill book. It's just funny. Oh, an adept locked wooden door. Well, don't mind if I do. Sleep in here. Okay. Let's search this room. Lots of stuff. Don't really care about any of it. I do need to watch for an alchemy lab and anything with a fear effect. So I'm wearing that last bit for the powdered mammoth tusk. Two more silver hands here. Don't need to deal with it.
Watch it there.
Lucas.
Watch it there.
Think you can take me?
Well, I can't have everybody decide to come after me like that, it seems. Or there will be trouble. Don't know what component I could break off of Vilcus. They were fighting him at first. Maybe they finished beating him up. Maybe he went down. Who knows?
That's it. That's all you've got.
Shoot.
What was that?
is the way forward. Let's check this room and the adjacent one first. Chest there. Coin purse. Just get everything out of this room, and then we'll head over to those bars. UESP tells me Zone 2, Driftshade Cellar. Forgot there were 2 zones. That's right, this place is big. We're gonna have 3 silver hands coming up. I believe Vilkas and I are up to the challenge. Let's go back here first. Make sure we don't miss anything. I'm sorry, UESP is organized in confusing fashion. We are not going to find 3 silver hand yet. Here we are in what appears to be a wine cellar. We've got 1 silver. See if we can keep Vilkas from hitting that pressure plate. As we open this adept locked door, or we do in a moment. There we go. One dead werewolf, not much else. Now, you might be thinking there's gotta be something behind those spikes. There is. We can manually activate it with this toolbar. And head back here. We're gonna find wine, a helmet, a shield, and a chest. Hooray. Let's keep going. Let's keep on going. Looks like we're in a storage room of sorts with a bunch of stuff. We're just gonna keep right on going. Shelf. Over here on the table, we've got an iron sword and a steel helmet. And another door. Two swords here. weak Silverhand, I might add. We have killed them off, so let's loot them and keep on going. Here in this vat room. Couple of buckets. Over here. This is a new book. The Rear Guard, a light armor skill book. Light armor's up to 73. That's wonderful. Let's take that off the list. And as far as free skill boosts for light armor, we have... Come on now. We've got 4 left to find. There's only 1 skill book left, and 3 quests that will boost that skill for us. The Rear Guard by Tenace Moral. The castle would hold, no matter the forces, the walls of Cascabel Hall would never fail, but that was small consolation for Menegar. He was hungry. In fact, he had never been so hungry. The well in the atrium of the fortress supplied him with enough water to hold there until the 4th era, but his stomach reminded Menegar minute to minute that he needed food. The wagon load of supplies mocked him. When his army, the forces of the King of Solitude, had left Cascabel Hall, and he had manned the battlements as the rear guard to protect their retreat, they had left a wagon behind to supply him with enough food for months. It was not until the night after they left that he inspected the larder and found that nothing edible was in the wagon. Trunk after trunk was filled with netch armor from the army's incursion into Morrowind. Apparently his Nord confederates had assumed that the lightly opaque material was hardtack in aspic. If the Dunmer whose caravan had been raided knew about this, they would never be able to stop laughing. Menegar thought that his fellow mercenary and kinswoman Erin would have found this amusing as well. She had spoken with great authority about netch leather, being an expert of sorts on light armor, but she had made a point to mention that it could not be eaten like other leather in occasions of hardship. It was a pity she couldn't be there to enjoy the irony, Menegar thought savagely. She had returned to Morrowind even before the king's army had left, preferring a life as a wanted fugitive to a free existence in the cold of Skyrim. All the weeds in the courtyard had been devoured by the rear guard's 16th day manning Cascabel Hall. The entire castle had been scoured, rotten tubers in the mulch pile found and consumed, a dusty bouquet in the countess's bedchamber eaten. Almost every rat and insect but the most cunning infesting the castle walls had been tracked down and gobbled up. The castellan's chambers, filled with acrid, inedible law books, had yielded up a couple crumbs of bread. Menegar had even scraped moss from the stones. There was no denying it. He would be dead from starvation before his army returned to break the ranks of the enemies who surrounded the fortress. The worst part, said Menegar, who had taken to talking to himself on only the 2nd day alone in the castle, is how close sustenance is. A vast arbor of golden apples stretched acre after acre near the castle walls. The sunlight cast a seductive gleam on the fruit, and the cruel wind carried sweet smells into Cascabel to torture him. Like most Bosmer, Menegar was an archer. He was a master of long and medium-distance fighting, but in close quarters, as he would be if he dared to leave the castle and enter the enemy camp in the arbor, he knew he would not last long. At some point he knew he would have to try, but he had been dreading the day. It was upon him now. Menegar put on the netch armor for the first time, feeling the powdery, almost velvet texture of the rendered leather against his skin. There was also a barely perceptible throb, which he recognized as the remnant nematocysts of the netch's venomous flesh, still tingling months after its death with domesticated poison. The combination made him feel energized. Erin had described the sensation perfectly, just as she had explained how to defend himself while wearing netch leather armor. Under cover of night, Menegar swept out of the back gate of the castle, locking it behind him with a rather cumbersome key. He made for the arbor as quietly as he could, but a passing sentry coming behind a tree saw him. Remaining calm, Menegar did as he remembered Erin had instructed, only moving after the attack had been launched. The sentry's blade glided against the armor and knocked to the left, throwing the young man off balance. That was the trick as he understood it. You had to be prepared to be hit, and merely move with the blow, allowing the membranous armor to divert the injury away. Use your enemy's momentum against him, as Aaron used to say. There were several more close encounters in the arbor, but each swing of an axe and each thrust of a sword found purchase elsewhere. With handfuls of apples, Menegar ran the gauntlet back to the castle. He locked the back gate door behind him and fell into an orgy of eating. For week after week, the Bosmer stole out to gather his food. The guards began anticipating his raids, but he kept his schedule irregular and always remembered when attacked to wait for the blow, accept it, and then turn. In such a way he lived and survived his lonely vigil in Cascabel Hall. 4 months later, as he was preparing for another seizure of apples, Menegar heard a loud clamor at the front gate. Surveying the group from a safe distance on the battlements, he saw the shields of the King of Solitude, his ally the Count of Cascabel, and their enemy the King of Farron. Evidently a truce had been called. Menegar opened the gates and the combined armies flooded the courtyard. Many of the knights of Farron sought to shake the hand of the man they had named the Shadow of the Arbor, expressing their admiration at his defensive skills and apologizing good-naturedly for their attempts to slay him. Only doing their job, you know. There's hardly an apple left on the vines, said the King of Solitude. Well, I started on the edges and worked my way in, explained Menegar. I brought back extra fruit to tempt the rats out of the walls so I could have a little meat as well. We spent the last several months working out the details of the truce, said the king. Really quite exhausting. In any rate, the Count will be taking back possession of his castle now, but there is a small detail we need to work out. You're a mercenary, and as such responsible for your own expenses. If you had been a subject of mine, things might be different, but there are certain old rules of law that must be respected. Menegar anticipated the strike. The problem is, the king continued, you've taken a good deal of the Count's crops while here. By any reasonable computation, you've eaten an amount equal to and likely exceeding your mercenaries' wages. Obviously, I would not want to penalize you for the excellent job you've done defending the castle in uncomfortable circumstances, but you agree that it's important that we observe the old rules of law, don't you? Of course, replied Menegar, accepting the blow. I'm delighted to hear that, said the king. Our estimation is that you owe the Count of Cascabel 37 imperial gold, which I will gladly pay to myself with interest after the autumn-tide harvest, said Menegar. There is more left on the vine than you suggest. The Kings of Solitude and Farron and the Count of Cascabel stared at the Bosmer. We agreed to abide to the strictest old rules of law, and I've had time to read a great many books over the time you were making your truce. In 246, during the reign of Uriel IV, the Imperial Council, in an attempt to clear up some questions of property rights in Skyrim during those chaotic days, decreed that any man without a liege who occupied a castle for more than 3 months would be granted the rights and titles of that estate. It's a good law, of course, meant to discourage absent and foreign landlords. Menegar smiled, feeling the now familiar sensation of a glancing strike diverting. By the rule of law, I am the Count of Cascabel. The rearguard's son still holds the title of Count of Cascabel, and he grows the finest, most delectable apples in the Empire. If you're wondering about that sound, my wife is playing Dance Central across the room. Let's continue on into this frozen tunnel.
Is someone there?
There's some hands here. They don't appear to be particularly strong. This is good. In fact, this archer is decided. Even while using his bow, which says something. Werewolf skin. That's new. I've not seen that before. That's a very strong. Let's loot him. An apprentice lock on the cage. First, I have 5 extras, so let's deal with those. Wait a second. The UESP has a note that if I attack him without unlocking the cage, it's considered an assault. That must have been a glitch. Because I am not getting it. Well, there's some meat in here. 3 goat legs. Let's go to the other cage. Nothing in here but a dead horse, but we can pick the lock and get a skosh more experience.
We're going to make them pay.
Alright, let's continue. Down this tunnel.
Is someone there?
This torture room. One dead werewolf to search. That's all rather gruesome. Let's get out of here. Two more silver hands in this room coming up.
Watch it there, brother.
Let's handle the other one.
I could take you.
We are almost done with this dungeon. There's just one fight left. Of course, it's the hardest one to get all this satisfied. In that open space behind the fireplace, we're going to find some ingredients, a coin purse, and a few potions. Let's check out the rest of this room. Nothing in front except one bottle of mead. Let's check back here. Nothing there. There's a potentially searchable cupboard over here. there's anything in this corridor. It just takes us back to the refuge. Now, we're gonna come to that room with 3 silver hands. And right at this point, I completely forgot what I was gonna say. There's 1 potion in here. Let's head up the stairs into the last room. Let's kill a silver hand. The last 3. Wipe out the silver hand. That's awesome. It's 2 down, 1 to go.
Never back down.
And that is it for combat. At full health. What do you know? Now that should have cleared the location. It did. There's the telltale wonderful chime indicating that precise thing. Let's do the opposite side first, away from our objective. It's just how I like to roll. Some smithing equipment over here. The main attraction, of course, is the boss chest. No important loot in it. Let's head over to the other side. Want to sit on the table. Does that to me all the damn time. 2920, Morning Star, Volume 1. Another new book. This one is a one-handed skill book. And now, of course, one-handed increases to 46. And I have 3 one-handed boosts left to find. There's 1 skill book left in the game, and 2 quests. Morning Star, Book 1 of 2920, The Last Year of the First Era, by Karlovac Townway. 1 Morning Star, 2920, Mournhold, Morrowind. Almalexia lay in her bed of fur, dreaming. Not until the sun burned through her window, infusing the light wood and flesh colors of her chamber in a milky glow, did she open her eyes. It was quiet and serene, a stunning reverse of the flavor of her dreams, so full of blood and celebration. For a few moments she simply stared at the ceiling, trying to sort through her visions. In the courtyard of her palace was a boiling pool which steamed in the coolness of the winter morning. At the wave of her hand, it cleared, and she saw the face and form of her lover Vivek in his study to the north. She did not want to speak right away. He looked so handsome in his dark red robes, writing his poetry as he did every morning. Vivek, she said, and he raised his head within a smile, looking at her face across thousands of miles. I have seen a vision of the end of the war. After 80 years, I don't think anyone can imagine an end, said Vivek with a smile, but he grew serious, trusting Almalexia's prophecies. Who will win, Morrowind or the Cyrodiilic Empire? Without Sothasil and Morrowind, we will lose, she replied. My intelligence tells me the Empire will strike us to the north in early springtide, by first seed at the latest. Could you go to Artaeum and convince him to return? I'll leave today, she said simply. 4 Morningstar, 2920, Gideon, Black Marsh. The Empress paced around her cell. Wintertide gave her wasteful energy, while in the summer she would merely sit by her window and be grateful for each breath of stale swamp wind that came to cool her. Across the room, her unfinished tapestry of a dance at the Imperial Court seemed to mock her. She ripped it from its frame, tearing the pieces apart as they drifted to the floor. Then she laughed at her own useless gesture of defiance. She would have plenty of time to repair it and craft 100 more. The Emperor had locked her up in Castle Jayavest 7 years ago, and would likely keep her here until he or she died. With a sigh, she pulled the cord to call her knight, Zook. He appeared at the door within minutes, fully uniformed as befitted an Imperial Guard. Most of the native Kothringi tribesmen of Black Marsh preferred to go about naked, but Zook had taken a positive delight to fashion. His silver reflective skin was scarcely visible, only on his face, neck, and hands. Your Imperial Highness, he said with a bow. Zook, said Empress Tavia. I'm bored. Let's discuss methods of assassinating my husband today. 14 Morningstar, 2920, the Imperial City, Cyrodiil. The chimes proclaiming Southwind's prayer echoed through the wide boulevards and gardens of the Imperial City, calling all to their temples. The Emperor Riemann III always attended a service at the Temple of the One, while his son and heir Prince Julik found it more political to attend a service at a different temple for each religious holiday. This year it was at the Cathedral Benevolence of Mara. The Benevolence's services were mercifully short, but it was not until well after noon that the Emperor was able to return to the palace. By then, the arena combatants were impatiently waiting for the start of the ceremony. The crowd was far less restless, as the potentate Versidue Shea had arranged for a demonstration from a troupe of Khajiit acrobats. Your religion is so much more convenient than mine, said the Emperor to his potentate by way of an apology. What is the first game? A one-on-one battle between 2 able warriors, said the potentate, his scaly skin catching the sun as he rose, armed befitting their culture. Sounds good, said the Emperor, and clapped his hands. Let the sport commence. As soon as he saw the 2 warriors enter the arena to the roar of the crowd, Emperor Riemann III remembered that he had agreed to this several months before and forgotten about it. One combatant was the potentate's son, Severian Chorak, a glistening ivory-yellow eel, gripping his katana and wakizashi with his thin, deceptively weak-looking arms. The other was the Emperor's son, Prince Julik, in ebony armor with a savage orcish helm, shield and longsword at his side. This will be fascinating to watch, hissed the potentate, a wide grin across his narrow face. I don't know if I've ever seen a Cyrodiil fight an Akavir like this. Usually it's army against army. At last we can settle which philosophy is better, to create armor to combat swords, as your people do, or to create swords to combat armor, as mine do. No one in the crowd, aside from a few scattered Akaviri counselors and the potentate himself, wanted Severian Chorak to win, but there was a collective intake of breath at the sight of his graceful movements. His swords seemed to be a part of him, a tail coming from his arms to match the one behind him. It was a trick of counterbalance, allowing the young serpent man to roll up into a circle and spin into the center of the ring in offensive position. The prince had to plod forward the less impressive traditional way. As they sprang at each other, the crowd bellowed with delight. The Akaviri was like a moon in orbit around the prince, effortlessly springing over his shoulder to attempt a blow from behind, but the prince whirled around quickly to block with his shield. His counter-strike met only air as his foe fell flat to the ground and slithered between his legs, tripping him. The prince fell to the ground with a resounding crash. Metal and air melted together as Severian Chorak rained strike after strike upon the prince, who blocked every one with his shield. We don't have shields in our culture, murmured Versidue Shea to the Emperor. It seems strange to my boy, I imagine. In our country, if you don't want to get hit, you move out of the way. When Severian Chorak was rearing back to begin another series of blinding attacks, the prince kicked at his tail, sending him falling back momentarily. In an instant he had rebounded, but the prince was also back on his feet. The two circled one another until the snake man spun forward, katana extended. The prince saw his foe's plan and blocked the katana with his longsword and the wakizashi with his shield. Its short, punching blade impaled itself in the metal, and Severian Chorak was thrown off balance. The prince's long blade slashed across the Akavir's chest, and the sudden, intense pain caused him to drop both his weapons. In a moment it was over. Severian Chorak was prostrate in the dust, with the prince's longsword at his throat. "The game's over," shouted the Emperor, barely heard over the applause from the stadium. The prince grinned and helped Severian Chorak up and over to a healer. The Emperor clapped his potentate on the back, feeling relieved. He had not realized when the fight had begun how little chance he had given his son at victory. "He will make a fine warrior," said Driftshade, "and a great emperor." "Just remember," laughed the Emperor, "you Akaviri have a lot of showy moves, but if just one of our strikes comes through, it's all over for you." "Oh, I'll remember that," nodded the potentate. Riemann thought about that comment for the rest of the games and had trouble fully enjoying himself. Could the potentate be another enemy, just as the Empress had turned out to be? The matter would bear watching. 21 Morningstar, 2920. Mournhold, Morrowind. "Why don't you wear that green gown I gave you?" asked the Duke of Mournhold, watching the young maiden put on her clothes. "It doesn't fit," smiled Tarala, "and you know I like red." "It doesn't fit because you're getting fat," laughed the Duke, pulling her down on the bed, kissing her breasts and the pouch of her stomach. She laughed at the tickles, but pulled herself up, wrapping her red robe around her. "I'm round, like a woman should be," said Tarala. "Will I see you tomorrow?" "No," said the Duke. "I must entertain Vivek tomorrow, and the next day the Duke of Ebenhard is coming. Do you know I never really appreciated Almalexia and her political skills until she left." "It is the same with me," smiled Tarala. "You will only appreciate me when I'm gone." "That's not true at all," snorted the Duke. "I appreciate you now." Tarala allowed the Duke one last kiss before she was out the door. She kept thinking about what he said. Would he appreciate her more or less when he knew that she was getting fat because she was carrying his child? Would he appreciate her enough to marry her? The year continues in Sun's Dawn. Let's go over here. Almost got everything. Another copy of Gods and Worship, Song of Pelennor 26. And the block skill book, Warrior. Yet another new book. Block up to 28. And if I jump to free boosts, having trouble finding block for some reason. There it is. There are still 7 block boosts left. 3 skill books left, and 4 quests to perform. Warrior by Revan. This is the 3rd book in a 4-book series. If you have not read the first 2 books, Beggar and Thief, you would be well advised to do so. Swoibud Errol did not know much of his past, nor did he care to. As a child he had lived in Errolgard, but the kingdom was very poor and taxes were, as a result, very high. He was too young to manage his abundant inheritance, but his servants, fearing that their master would be ruined, moved him to Jotunheim. No one knew why that location was picked. Some old maid, long dead now, had thought it was a good place to raise a child. No one else had a better idea. There may have been children with a more pampered, more spoiled existence than young Swoibud, but that is doubtful. As he grew, he understood that he was rich, but he had nothing else. No family, no social position, no security at all. Loyalty, he found out on more than one occasion, cannot truly be bought. Knowing that he had but one asset, a vast fortune, he was determined to protect it and, if possible, increase it. Some otherwise perfectly nice people are greedy, but Swoibud was that rare accident of nature or breeding who has no other interest but acquiring and hoarding gold. He was willing to do anything to increase his fortune. Most recently, he had begun secretly hiring mercenaries to attack desirable properties, and then buying them when no one wanted to live there anymore. The attacks would then, of course, cease, and Swoibud would have profitable land which he had purchased for a song. It had begun small with a few farms, but recently he had begun a more ambitious campaign. In north-central Skyrim, there is an area called the Alto, which is of unique geographical interest. It is a dormant volcanic valley surrounded on all sides by glaciers, so the earth is hot from the volcano, but the constant water drizzle and air is frigid. A grape called Jazzbay grows there comfortably, and everywhere else in Tamriel it withers and dies. The strange vineyard is privately owned, and the wine produced from it is thus rare and extremely expensive. It is said that the Emperor needs the permission of the Imperial Council to have a glass of it once a year. In order to harass the owner of the Alto into selling his land cheap, Swoibud had to hire more than a few mercenaries. He had to hire the finest private army in Skyrim. Swoibud did not like spending money, but he had agreed to pay the general of the army, a woman named Lysifitra, a gem the size of an apple. He had not given it to her yet. Payment was to be delivered on the success of the mission, but he had trouble sleeping knowing that he was going to be giving up such a prize. He always slept during the day so he could watch his storehouse by night, when he knew thieves were about. That brings us up to this moment, when, after a fitful sleep, Swoibud woke up at about noon and surprised a thief in his bedroom. The thief was Eslaf. Eslaf had been contemplating a leap from the window 100 feet down into the branches of a tree beyond the walls of the fortified palace, and a tumble into a stack of hay. Anyone who has ever attempted such a feat will testify that it takes some concentration and nerve to do such a thing. When he saw that the rich man sleeping in the room had awakened, both left him, and Eslaf slipped behind a tall ornamental shield on display to wait for Swoibud to go back to sleep. Swoibud did not go back to sleep. He had heard nothing, but could feel someone in the room with him. He stood up and began pacing the room. Swoibud paced, and gradually decided that he was imagining things. No one was there. His fortune was safe and secure. He was returning to his bed when he heard a clunk. Turning around, he saw the gem, the one he was to give to Lysifitra on the floor by the Atmoran cavalry shield. A hand reached out from behind the shield and grabbed it up. "Thief!" Swoibud cried out, grabbing a jeweled Akaviri katana from the wall and lunging at the shield. The fight between Eslaf and Swoibud will not go down in the annals of great duels. Swoibud did not know how to use a sword, and Eslaf was no expert at blocking with a shield. It was clumsy, it was awkward. Swoibud was furious, but was psychologically incapable of using the sword in any way that could damage its fine filigree, reducing its market value. Eslaf kept moving, dragging the shield with him, trying to keep it between him and the blade, which is, after all, the most essential part of any block. Swoibud screamed in frustration as he struck at the shield, bumping its way across the room. He even tried negotiating with the thief, explaining that the gem was promised to a great warrior named Lysifitra, and if he would give it back, Swoibud would happily give him something else in return. Eslaf was not a genius, but he did not believe that. By the time Swoibud's guards came to the bedroom in response to their master's calls, he had succeeded in backing the shield into a window. They fell on the shield, having considerably more expertise with their swords than Swoibud did, but they discovered that there was no one behind it. Eslaf had leapt out the window and escaped. As he ran heavily through the streets of Yalenheim, making jingling noises from the gold coins in his pockets, and feeling the huge gem chafe where he had hidden it, Eslaf did not know where he should go next. He knew only that he could never go back to that town, and he must avoid this warrior named Lysifitra who had claims on the jewel. Eslaf Errol's story is continued in the book King. That's it for the Eslaf series. That is everything except the fragments of Uthrad, so let's grab those up. Return to Jorvaskr. Vilkas and I avenged Codblack's death by bringing a ruin to the Silver Hand. Indeed we did. Now it's a simple matter of offloading and progressing the quest. And of course, here we are at the barred door.
Let's get back to Jorvaskr. We'll want to pay our respects to Codlack's spirit.
I'm not carrying anything stolen, so offloading in Whiterun will be fine. There's that. I'm just gonna get to the horse. I'm gonna get detect life in my right hand. Now, I'm not actually going to progress the quest. I think I'm just going to offload and call it good. Because I've already been going an hour and 20 minutes.
The others have probably prepared Kodlak's funeral by now. Come up to the Sky Forge to pay your respects. There's something out there.
Oh my gosh. We're gonna have to wait. So that we don't have to deal with a vampire. I don't know how long to wait. 3 a.m. sounds good. I guess we're not that far away from my run, so that makes sense.
The others have probably prepared Kodlak's funeral by now. Come up to the Sky Forge to pay your respects.
Come to chat with an old woman, hmm?
Here we go.
Do your good deed for the dead.
We've completed Purity of Revenge. Vilkas and I avenged Kodlak's death by bringing ruin to the Silver Hand, and we have started the final companion's quest, Glory of the Dead. I should attend the funeral of Kodlak Whitemane, the late harbinger of the companions. Attend Kodlak's funeral. I will certainly do that next time.
You're someone. The finest weapons and armor.
Let's begin offloading. See where everything should take.
Don't forget to check inside the shop if you need anything.
Let's do the same thing with Birth.
Welcome to... Looking to protect yourself or deal some damage? Good doing business with you.
Leaving across the street and do the same thing with another deer.
Take a look.
I want to sell him the Nordic carved armor because he can actually afford it. Alright.
Thank you very much for your business.
I think with that, we're ready to just go into Belethor's and stick with that. a glitch. You've got to be kidding me. What time is it?
Well met, Well met, traveler.
Let me know if you see
There
anything
we
you
go.
like.
That was close. That would have been annoying.
Every trinkets, odds and ends, that sort of thing.
Alright. Let's get started.
Do come back. Help! ID trinkets, odds and ends, that sort of thing.
Just watch for that fear effect.
Remember, I'll give you the best. What do you think you're doing? You just let... Some may call this junk. Me, I call them treasures.
Always disease immunity. I'm beginning to think it's never gonna give me poison resistance.
Next time... Help! Welcome. Trinkets, odds and ends, that sort of thing. All right, then. Help me!
Offloading is annoying.
I know. Some may
it's
call this
necessary.
junk. Me, I call them treasures.
And we're already kind of close to done.
Till next time. What do you think you're... Yes? Trinkets, odds and ends, that sort of thing. All right, then. Help! Got some? Some may call this junk. Me, I call them treasures. All right, then. What do you think you're doing?
Almost done with
Yes?
apparel.
Take a look.
That's good, that's good. And that just leaves weapons. Let's start at the bottom. Just to change it up.
What do you think you're... Yes? Some may call this junk. Me, I call them treasures.
Well, that was
Till
simple.
next time. What do you think you're... Some may call this junk. Me, I call them treasures.
Alright, so great sword. Warhammer. soul snares, war axe, 5 swords, 7 maces, 1 great sword, 3 hunting bows, elven dagger.
All right, then. Help! Trinkets, odds and ends, that sort of thing.
I think we might manage to finish this time. 2 elven bows, not quite.
All right, then. Help me!
Sell him the dwarven sword of
Oh,
debilitation.
a bit of this and a bit of that.
And we need to run over to Arcadia's.
Till next time.
Don't worry, I didn't forget.
Take care with those flames.
Let's see if she sells anything with fear effect, which will allow
Take a
me
good
to
look around.
remove
I'm
powdered
sure you'll-
mammoth tusk
What do you need?
from my list.
Take a look.
Fear, 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 fear. There it is.
Come back anytime if you need a remedy.
With that, we know all 4 effects on powdered mammoth tusk, and I can take it off the list. And let's sell her that potion.
You look... So you're interested in my potions and ingredients? Good day.
And we're about ready to call it a video.
Heard what you did? Killing those
I'm going to end here. Next time we will attend Kodlak's funeral, progress the quest, and go to the final dungeon of the Companion's Line. Until then, this has been Let's Play Skyrim. We cleared out Driftshade Refuge and completed Purity of Revenge. Next time, we'll do Glory of the Dead. Until then, thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.